Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we drift far from highways, glowing phone screens, and that suspicious kitchen noise you absolutely heard but are choosing to ignore, out onto the largest ocean on Earth, where the night stretches over you like black silk scattered with diamonds. You are standing barefoot on the curved wooden spine of a canoe somewhere in the Pacific. No GPS, no compass, no cozy weather app warning you about moderate chop. Just stars, endless stars. Above you, they glitter so fiercely that modern city dwellers would probably assume the sky had upgraded to premium mode. The sea breathes below, dark and immense, and you, brave or perhaps just deeply committed to poor decision-making, are about to trust your life to memory, wave patterns, and celestial dots. You probably won't survive, at least not if your current navigation skills are limited to following your phone charger across the bedroom. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, comment your local location and time because honestly, it's comforting to know who else is awake while you're voluntarily sailing into prehistoric uncertainty. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a world where maps do not exist on paper because they exist instead inside people. The canoe beneath you rocks softly, carved from towering trees and lashed together with fibers so carefully woven they'd make modern flat-pack furniture designers weep. Around you, elder navigators do not squint at gadgets or unfold laminated charts. They look up. That's it. Just up. Imagine crossing thousands of miles of ocean because you remembered where a star rose during one season and where another dipped below the horizon months later. Meanwhile, you can barely remember where you left your keys. This is Polynesia, though not yet the sprawling triangle historians would later define from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island. For now, it is a growing web of islands and people whose ancestors dared something extraordinary. They looked at an ocean so vast it seemed designed purely to discourage exploration, and they went anyway. The Pacific at night feels alive. Salt hangs in the air, wind brushes your skin with damp fingers, the hull creaks like whispered advice from ancestors. Every sound matters, the splash against wood, the snap of sail, the distant cry of birds. The stars above are not decoration. They are a library. You begin to understand that Polynesian wayfinding is not casual stargazing. This is precision. A navigator memorizes star houses, the points on the horizon where specific stars rise and set. Each star becomes a directional marker, sliding into place like cosmic signposts. Sirius, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, these are not poetic ornaments, they are coordinates. If one star disappears below clouds, another takes its place. The sky is a rotating compass wheel, and you are learning to read it while sleep-deprived on a floating log. Historians commonly recognize the Austronesian expansion, beginning thousands of years ago from Taiwan and moving through island Southeast Asia as one of humanity's greatest migration stories. But out here, it doesn't feel like a migration. It feels like audacity with a sail. A strange little known fact. Some navigators trained by lying flat for hours, observing star paths so thoroughly that the sky became as familiar as a family home. Imagine explaining that to someone today. Sorry, can't hang out, I'm memorizing celestial geometry. And yet, despite all this brilliance, historians are still debating whether early voyages were primarily accidental drift journeys or intentionally planned expeditions. Frankly, when you're crossing an ocean on purpose without a Starbucks in sight, accidental feels like an insult. The canoe glides onward. You notice how the navigator's body seems tuned to movement. He feels subtle swells crossing under the hull from different directions, like the ocean itself is sending Morse code through his feet. One wave pattern might have originated from distant trade winds, another rebounding off islands hundreds of miles away. To you, it feels like wet wobbling, To him, it's information. The stars wheel overhead as the night deepens. Polaris, the North Star, which many Northern Hemisphere travelers rely on, becomes less useful here as you move south. Polynesian navigators instead build an entire mental architecture of rising and setting stars unique to their latitude. They know that certain stars only appear in certain places, certain seasons. It's like celestial calendar management, but with much higher stakes than missing dentist appointments. And then there are the stories. Every constellation carries layers of meaning, myth, genealogy, practical guidance. Navigation is not separate from culture, it is culture. You are not merely learning direction. You are inheriting a worldview where sky, sea, ancestry, and identity merge. The canoe becomes more than transport, it becomes a thread connecting generations. You imagine dawn eventually coming, though for now darkness feels infinite. Somewhere ahead are islands no one on your canoe may have seen, perhaps spoken of only in chants. Tiny green fragments scattered across a blue wilderness larger than all continents combined. It's almost absurd, like searching for a breadcrumb in a stadium-sized swimming pool, yet they do it. Captain James Cook, centuries later, would be stunned by Polynesian navigators' abilities, though Europeans often underestimated what they were witnessing. But here, long before foreign sails, there is no need for outside validation. The proof is in each successful landfall. The sea offers no mercy for arrogance. Water stores your mistakes with chilling efficiency. But Polynesian voyagers prepare with discipline. Food stores, fishing knowledge, weather awareness, canoe engineering, and social trust. Survival is communal. If one person forgets, everyone pays. Cloud bands drift overhead. The navigator watches them too. Reflections beneath clouds can hint at lagoons beyond sight. Birds might signal nearby land if they fly out at dawn and return by dusk. Even floating driftwood or specific seaweed can whisper clues. You begin to realize this journey is not blind wandering. It is observation elevated into art. And maybe that's what feels most astonishing tonight. Not that ancient people crossed oceans, but that they did so through intimacy rather than conquest. They learned the sea instead of trying to dominate it. They listened, so you keep listening too, to water, wind, wood, and stars. Your modern brain, accustomed to blinking icons and robotic directions saying recalculating, starts to soften. Here, there is no recalculating, only remembering. Above you, the star compass turns, ancient and patient. And somewhere in that immense darkness, guided by points of light so old their beams began before your great-grandparents existed, you move steadily forward, one silent wave at a time. Section 2. By first light, your spine has discovered muscles it would very much like to file complaints about, because sleeping on a voyaging canoe is less luxury cruise and more wooden yoga challenge designed by the sea. Dawn arrives not with fanfare, but with a gradual silver glow spreading across the Pacific, revealing a world made almost entirely of water, sky, and your increasingly personal relationship with salt. The stars retreat, but their lessons linger, and now your attention shifts downward toward the vessel carrying you across this shimmering immensity. You are standing aboard one of humanity's most astonishing inventions, the Polynesian voyaging canoe, a masterpiece of engineering born not from metal shipyards or industrial machinery, but from forests, stone tools, communal labor, and an absolutely unreasonable amount of courage. Back on land, before this canoe ever kissed the ocean, everything began with trees. Not just any trees, of course. You don't cross the Pacific in a random log in good intentions. Master builders selected immense hardwoods with care, bordering on reverence, often choosing breadfruit, koa, or other massive trunks sturdy enough to become hulls. Felling one of these giants without steel tools was no quick weekend project. Stone adzes chipped and carved for weeks, sometimes months, transforming forest titans into sleek vessels. Imagine building an ocean-going craft with tools that would make your local hardware store clerk quietly panic. The work was sacred. Trees could be chosen through ritual, prayer, and social ceremony because this wasn't merely construction, it was transformation. A living being of the forest would become a living being of the sea. Historians note that in many Polynesian cultures, canoe building involves spiritual protocols where mistakes could be seen not just as technical failures, but as cosmic disrespect. So no pressure. You watch craftsmen smooth wood with shell and stone, shaping twin hulls designed for balance and endurance. Double-hulled canoes were revolutionary. While much of the ancient world still hugged coastlines, these vessels offered stability over brutal distances. Their wide platform could carry families, crops, animals, water, and hope. Think of it as the prehistoric equivalent of a moving van, if your moving van floated and sharks occasionally inspected it. Each hull is lashed, not nailed. That may sound primitive until you realize its genius. Coconut fiber cordage, sinnet, is braided with remarkable strength, binding components flexibly so the canoe can move with waves rather than snap rigidly against them. In rough seas, a little give can mean survival. Modern engineers might call it adaptive stress distribution. Ancient Polynesians probably called it common sense. A strange little known fact, some canoe lashings were so intricate and valued that specialized experts existed just for cordage production, and finely braided sinnet could hold social prestige. Basically, rope making could make you elite. Somewhere, a forgotten rope artisan is nodding smugly. Sails emerge next, woven from pandanus leaves and shaped to harness shifting winds. These crab-claw sails are brilliantly efficient, capable of remarkable speed and maneuverability. European explorers would later marvel at how swiftly Polynesian canoes moved, sometimes outperforming Western ships in certain conditions, which must have been humbling if you arrived in a giant imperial vessel only to be casually outsailed by woven leaves. As the canoe takes form, it becomes community embodied. Women weave sails and mats. Men carve and lash. Priests bless. Children watch and learn. Food is prepared. Chants are spoken. You start to understand that no one builds a voyaging canoe alone, just as no one crosses an ocean entirely by themselves. Every launch carries an entire society's labor. And then comes provisioning. You can't exactly stop at a gas station in the mid-Pacific, so preparation is meticulous. Breadfruit paste, fermented and preserved, becomes a portable calorie reserve. Coconuts provide hydration. Dried fish stores protein. Plants, root crops, pigs, chickens, sometimes entire ecological packages travel aboard because voyagers are not simply exploring. They are transplanting civilization. This is migration by biosphere. The canoe is a floating seed bank, a wooden arc of continuity. Historians are still debating whether some long-distance voyages were exploratory one-way missions or carefully planned round trips for reconnaissance before settlement. Either way, imagine being selected for the let's sail into oblivion and maybe report back team. As you drift farther from shore, land eventually dissolves behind you. That moment must have felt enormous, the psychological severing from everything known. No mountains on the horizon, no familiar trees, just trust in craftsmanship, memory, and the people beside you. You run your hand over the polished wood. It's warm now beneath the sun, carrying traces of adze marks and human touch. Every inch reflects choices accumulated over generations. Which wood bends best? Which sail shape catches trade winds? Which hull width balances cargo and speed? This knowledge is experimental science, refined not in laboratories, but through survival. And survival can be unforgiving. Storms split weak canoes, poor lashings fail, bad design sinks. The Pacific was an uncompromising reviewer, so successful designs endured. You notice decorative carvings too, sometimes symbolic, sometimes protective. The canoe is practical, yes, but never merely functional. It carries identity, clan, myth, spiritual meaning. You are sailing in both transportation and testimony. As waves slap rhythmically beneath you, the canoe begins to feel less like an object and more like a companion. It creaks, flexes, responds. It has moods. You suspect that after enough weeks aboard, you'd probably start talking to it, which honestly seems healthier than arguing with the ocean. Above, frigate birds wheel. Below, deep currents move unseen. And between those worlds, your vessel threads onward. There's something profoundly intimate about this technology. Unlike modern machines that often separate you from environment with screens and steel, the voyaging canoe demands awareness. You feel wind shifts instantly. You notice weight distribution. You read sail tension. You become part of the machine, or perhaps more accurately, the canoe becomes an extension of your body. By midday, sun glitters off every wave crest like shattered mirrors. The sea is beautiful, yes, but also immense enough to make your existential questions feel aggressively relevant. Still, the canoe holds, because it was made not just from wood, but from memory, forest transformed into future. And as your floating world cuts through blue distances, you realize these vessels were never simple boats. They were civilizations, carved and stitched, setting sail. Section 3. By the third night, the romance of ocean travel has adjusted itself into something more realistic, less ethereal communion with nature, and more, your legs are permanently damp and you've forgotten what standing still feels like. The canoe rises and dips beneath you with such constant devotion that even your thoughts seem to sway. But somewhere between mild dehydration and star admiration, your senses begin changing. You stop seeing the Pacific as empty. Because it isn't empty. It is textured, alive, structured. And beneath your feet, the ocean is speaking in a language so subtle, so astonishingly precise that most modern people would miss it entirely while checking notifications. Tonight, clouds gather. The stars, your celestial companions, vanish one by one behind thickening gray, and suddenly your sky compass is gone. No glowing guideposts, no familiar star houses, just darkness above and black water below. For many of us, this would be the maritime equivalent of losing Wi-Fi during an online exam. Panic. Immediate panic. But not here. The navigator does not unravel, he adjusts. Because long before satellites, Polynesian wayfinders developed something extraordinary. They could read swells. Not waves exactly, not the splashy surface chaos that soaks you at inconvenient intervals, but deep ocean swells, massive rhythmic patterns generated by distant winds and weather systems traveling across thousands of miles with remarkable consistency. These swells are like underwater highways, invisible but reliable, crossing the Pacific in intersecting directions. To you, it feels like rocking. To a master navigator, it feels like orientation. You shift carefully, knees bent, as the canoe rides one dominant swell from the northeast, while a subtler cross swell brushes from another angle. The navigator's body registers this through the hull, the way your fingers might read braille. Slight pressure changes, hull angle, timing, motion. Imagine balancing on a giant floating metronome while deciphering planetary geometry. No pressure. A strange little known fact, some traditional navigators trained apprentices to sit or lie in canoes with eyes closed, identifying directional swells purely by feel. Basically, ancient maritime Jedi training. This skill was not mystical. It was observational genius. In regions like Micronesia, which shares related wayfinding traditions, navigators even conceptualized islands as stationary beneath moving swells, mentally bringing destinations toward themselves through wave orientation. Polynesian systems varied culturally, but the principle remained breathtakingly sophisticated. Motion itself became map. Historians are still debating whether every long-range Polynesian culture used identical navigational systems or whether techniques evolved distinctly across island groups over time. Either way, your own current system, hoping for Google Maps, is not helping. The sea surface shifts under moonless skies. Wind chops skitters over larger swell systems, creating layers of movement like percussion over bass notes. Some swells come from prevailing trade winds. Others rebound off distant islands, bending around land masses in detectable ways. Yes, islands can create wave shadows and reflected patterns, which means astonishingly, a skilled navigator may sense land before seeing it. Imagine discovering Hawaii because the ocean subtly changed texture. Meanwhile, you once missed your own driveway. The canoe glides onward. Rain begins. Not dramatic, cinematic rain, but a soft, persistent drizzle, cool against your shoulders. Clouds erase the horizon line until sea and sky blur into one seamless void. Yet this is when listening deepens. You hear hull resonance. Different wave directions strike wood with slightly different rhythms. Water slaps, water hisses, water rolls. Every sound contains clues. You begin noticing too, though clumsily. One side of the canoe rises first. Another shudders. Certain swells feel long and muscular, others choppy and impatient, like the sea equivalent of polite conversation interrupted by caffeine. The navigator remains calm because knowledge here is cumulative. Stars, yes, but also swells, winds, bird paths, seasonal currents, cloud forms, water temperature, even bioluminescence patterns. Polynesian navigation is redundancy layered into mastery. If one system fails, another takes over. It's less one map than many overlapping maps. And unlike your phone battery, these systems do not die at 2%. The common historical reality is this. Pacific exploration required crossing distances so vast that accidental settlement alone cannot explain it all. Islands separated by thousands of miles were reached repeatedly. This demanded intentionality, skill, and navigational depth. Scholars once underestimated this, framing Polynesians as drifters. Modern research has done much to correct that deeply silly assumption, because drifting does not produce a civilization spanning 1/3 of the planet. Around midnight, the rain eases. Clouds part just enough to reveal a few stars, and they are greeted not with relief, but confirmation. The navigator already knows where you are. The stars merely nod in agreement. You, on the other hand, feel emotionally validated just finding one constellation. There's humility in this. The ocean is not conquered here. It is interpreted. And perhaps that's why this knowledge feels so profound. It emerges not from domination, but relationship. Generations watched, memorized, tested, survived, failed, adjusted. Their descendants inherited not machines, but awareness sharpened to astonishing levels. You think of modern instruments, radar, sonar, digital compasses. While impressive, they can create distance between person and environment. Polynesian wayfinding does the opposite. It requires immersion so complete that your body becomes instrument. Your skin reads wind, your ears read hull, your muscles read motion, your memory reads stars. By dawn, clouds finally dissolve, unveiling a pale horizon washed in rose and gold. The sea softens under morning light, and you realize something impossible has happened. You are no longer staring at random water. You are beginning to read it. Not fluently, perhaps. More like a tourist painfully sounding out menu items. But still, progress. The swells continue beneath you, ancient and tireless, crossing ocean basins as they have for millennia. Their patterns connect storms, islands, and seasons in one vast moving network. And as your canoe rides those hidden roads, you understand that the Pacific was never a barrier. For those who learned its language, it was a path. Section 4. Morning spreads itself across the Pacific like warm oil over polished blue glass. And for one dangerously optimistic moment, you begin to think this whole voyaging business might actually be manageable. The sea sparkles. Flying fish launch themselves from waves like silver arrows with commitment issues. A breeze nudges the sail just enough to keep everyone from melting entirely. You almost forget that you are still on an enormous watery void with no visible land, where getting lost means becoming a cautionary tale for future generations. But this is exactly when Polynesian navigators become even more attentive. Because stars and swells can guide you magnificently, yes, But, but the ocean also scatters clues above and around you, subtle little hints that land may exist somewhere beyond the blue curve. The trick is noticing them before your snacks run out. You squint into the distance, and at first all you see is sky, then birds. A single white tern flickers across the horizon, delicate and purposeful, gliding low before vanishing. To you, it's a lovely bird. To an experienced navigator, it may be a breadcrumb. Seabirds are among the Pacific's greatest tattletales. Certain species, like terns and noddies, often forage at sea during the day, but return to land at night. Frigate birds, dramatic creatures that somehow look perpetually offended, generally don't rest on water and often remain within reachable distance of islands. So by observing flight direction at dawn or dusk, navigators could estimate where land might be. Bird watching, suddenly, is no longer a hobby for retirees with binoculars. It is survival. A strange little known fact: Polynesian navigators sometimes released captured birds during voyages, watching which direction they flew to determine if land was nearby. If the bird circled back, congratulations, you are all still very far from shore. Historians are still debating how standardized bird use practices were across different Polynesian societies, but across Oceania, bird behavior absolutely mattered. Nature was not background scenery, it was data. The canoe moves onward. Clouds gather ahead, not storm clouds, but something subtler. Low, stationary puffs hanging near the horizon. The navigator studies them carefully. Islands affect clouds. Lagoons can reflect sunlight upward, tinting cloud undersides greenish or bright. High volcanic islands can force moist air upward, creating persistent cloud formations above otherwise hidden land. This means clouds are not just weather. Sometimes they are billboards. Imagine seeing a suspiciously parked cloud and realizing it might be sitting over salvation. You stare harder now, and there, just maybe, you notice a slight brightness beneath one cloud bank. A shimmer. Not obvious, but enough. Coral lagoons can cast luminous reflections onto clouds, especially in certain light. To modern eyes, this may seem absurdly subtle, but after weeks at sea, your observational standards become aggressive. Even floating debris tells stories: a branch, a coconut, a cluster of seaweed. None are random if you know currents. Land sends signatures outward, and navigators become detectives of drift. This is where patience matters. Not every bird means paradise. Not every cloud means island. Sometimes a cloud is just a cloud, which honestly feels rude when your water supply is finite. Misreading signs could be disastrous, so navigators combine clues rather than trusting one alone. Bird path, cloud type, swell reflection, debris, sun angle. Together, they form probability, and probability out here can save your life. The historical achievement becomes clearer with every passing day. Polynesian voyagers were not blindly stumbling upon islands. They were actively interpreting environmental systems with a complexity rivaling scientific fieldwork. Long before meteorology apps, they were reading ecological networks in real time. You notice fish changes too. Near islands, marine life can shift. Certain species become more common. Water color may subtly alter due to shallower reefs. Even smell, yes, smell can sometimes reveal land. Damp vegetation, bird guano, or reef ecosystems may ride the breeze. So now, in addition to stars, swells, and birds, you are sniffing the air like an oceanic bloodhound. Dignity is clearly secondary to survival. By afternoon, the heat becomes relentless. Sunlight pounds your shoulders, salt dries white on skin, your lips feel suspiciously like old rope, yet even discomfort becomes teacher. The navigator notes wind shifts tied to island heating patterns. Daytime breezes can behave differently near land and open ocean. Nothing is ignored. And that, perhaps, is the most remarkable thing. Polynesian wayfinding transforms the world from scenery into conversation. Every bird asks a question. Every cloud suggests possibility. Every floating leaf may carry rumor. The Pacific stops being empty because emptiness was never the point. Awareness was. You think of how many modern people move through life half looking, half listening, guided by algorithms and deadlines, missing subtle cues constantly. Here, survival depends on noticing what most would dismiss. A bird's route, a cloud's stillness, a current's texture. Attention becomes sacred. Toward evening, more birds appear. Not many, just enough. Their direction sharpens communal energy aboard the canoe. Quiet glances, subtle adjustments. Hope, but disciplined hope. No one celebrates prematurely because false hope can sting worse than sunburn. Then, as sunset burns orange across the sea, someone points. At first, you see nothing. Then, there, a faint dark shape, almost imaginary, rising low against the horizon. Land. Perhaps only a small atoll. Perhaps fresh water, coconuts, and a chance to stop smelling like fermented regret. But land, your chest tightens, not because of conquest, because of recognition. This island was found not through brute force, nor luck alone, but through relationship, through reading life itself. Birds led, clouds hinted, swells confirmed, and now shore answers. As night falls and stars begin returning one by one, you understand something deeply soothing. Ancient voyagers survived not by overpowering uncertainty, but by becoming exquisitely observant within it. And maybe, as your canoe glides toward dark palms and reef-shadowed safety, that's the quieter lesson whispered by this ocean. Sometimes the way forward appears first as only the smallest sign. Section 5. The island fades behind you eventually, as islands always do when voyaging is your inheritance rather than your vacation plan. And once again the horizon becomes a circle so perfect it feels almost sarcastic. But now you carry more than provisions. You carry context. These islands are not isolated miracles. They are chapters in a story far older than your canoe, older than these star paths, older even than the Polynesian identity still forming across the ocean. To understand how you came to stand here, scanning waves like a very determined, coconut-powered astronaut, you must travel backward, far westward, through generations, to the people historians call the Lapita. They do not yet call themselves Polynesians, but they are among the great ancestors of that future. Roughly 3,000 years ago, communities associated with the Lapita cultural complex expanded eastward from regions near island Southeast Asia, through Melanesia, and into the remote Pacific. Archaeologists know them not from whispered legends alone, but from pottery, intricately dentate stamped ceramics decorated with geometric designs so distinctive that broken shards can map migration itself. Imagine your civilization being traced by ancient casserole fragments. And yet, those pottery pieces matter enormously. The Lapita horizon marks one of humanity's most extraordinary expansions into previously uninhabited islands. These voyagers moved through places like the Bismarck Archipelago, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, carrying domesticated plants, animals, fishing technologies, and social structures. They were not random drifters. They were builders of worlds. You picture their canoes cutting into unfamiliar waters, generation after generation pushing farther east. Not recklessly, systematically. They brought taro, yam, breadfruit, pigs, chickens, and language roots that would eventually blossom into the Polynesian languages spoken across vast distances. Their voyages seeded ecosystems and societies. Every successful landfall became another node in a growing oceanic web. A strange little-known fact: Lapita pottery often disappears in later Polynesian regions, likely because portable ceramics became less practical during long voyages where weight mattered. So one of archaeology's greatest clues literally vanishes as migration advances. It's like future historians trying to track you only to discover you stopped using mugs. Historians are still debating the precise social drivers behind Lapita expansion. Population pressure, resource competition, social prestige, exploration ethos, or combinations of all three. Human motivation, as always, refuses tidy packaging. The canoe rolls beneath you as stars return, And you imagine those earlier ancestors under similar skies, though perhaps reading them with slightly different frameworks, adapting inherited Austronesian traditions to ever more demanding Pacific distances. This is where the Pacific transforms from near-water navigation into true blue-water voyaging. Near Oceania, closer island chains with more visible stepping stones gradually gives way to remote Oceania, where islands become separated by far greater distances. This shift is monumental. It requires technological refinement, navigational evolution, and perhaps most importantly, psychological resilience. Because there comes a point where land genuinely disappears. No more casual island hopping, no reassuring mountain visible after a week. Just trust. Lapita communities eventually helped establish Western Polynesian cultural centers in places like Tonga and Samoa, where distinctive Polynesian society began consolidating. Here, over generations, language, social systems, and voyaging capacities evolved further. Think of it as the developmental launchpad for one of the greatest exploration networks in human history. And unlike empires obsessed with territorial domination, these expansions often focused on settlement, kinship, and adaptation. You're not planting flags, you're planting breadfruit, though admittedly, breadfruit lacks dramatic flair. By moonlight, you consider the practical challenge. Every migration required enough people to sustain a viable community, enough biodiversity to survive, and enough navigational precision to avoid turning your colonization effort into fish food. The margin for error was horrifyingly small, yet they succeeded. Again and again, across centuries. This common historical reality often receives less global recognition than transatlantic voyages or Silk Road caravans, perhaps because oceanic exploration without written chronicles can be underestimated by text-heavy civilizations. But make no mistake, this was exploration on a civilizational scale. And while pottery shards and linguistic reconstructions tell scholars much, oral traditions carry other truths. Genealogies, chants, and ancestral memory preserved movement across generations. Though interpreting them today requires caution and respect, you begin to sense how migration itself becomes identity, not rootlessness, root carrying. The canoe is homeland in motion until new homeland is found. There's a soft irony here too. Many modern societies equate stability with staying put, yet some of humanity's most sophisticated cultures emerge through movements so intentional it stitched together half the planet. As dawn nears, pink light spills over water, and you imagine Lapita descendants standing exactly where you are now, watching horizons, evaluating swells, preparing children for futures not yet visible. They likely felt fear, excitement, loss, ambition, maybe even occasional irritation at whoever forgot to secure the dried fish. Because history is grand, yes, but also deeply practical. The farther east they moved, the more selective and refined their voyaging systems became. Samoa and Tonga would later stand as major ancestral homelands from which central and eastern Polynesian migrations expanded after periods of development. This pause matters. Exploration was not always constant forward motion. Sometimes societies consolidated, adapted, and then launched again. Like drawing breath before another impossible crossing. And that may be one of the gentlest truths in this story. Expansion was not chaos. It was rhythm. Push outward. Learn. Settle. Remember. Push again. The ocean did not yield easily, but these ancestors did not approach it empty-handed. They brought memory, experimentation, technology, and astonishing patience. So as your canoe slips onward beneath the same celestial architecture that watched Lapita sailors millennia ago, you realize you are part of a continuum stretching back through unnamed navigators, potters, farmers, and storytellers. Their pottery may crack, their names may blur, but their routes endure, invisible beneath the waves, still carrying you east. Section 6 by now, the canoe feels less like transportation and more like an oddly creaky graduate school for survival, where every sunrise brings another lesson you did not technically enroll in, but are absolutely expected to master. The stars still guide, the swells still murmur, the birds still gossip, but something deeper has become clear. None of this astonishing knowledge survives by accident, because wayfinding is not just skill, it is inheritance. And inheritance, especially when your classroom is the Pacific Ocean, requires discipline so intense it makes modern exam prep look like casual doodling. Somewhere in Western Polynesia, perhaps Samoa, perhaps Tonga, perhaps another sacred center of voyaging knowledge, you sit cross-legged as a child beneath the night sky while an elder navigator speaks. There are no textbooks, no laser pointers, no educational podcast titled Ocean Navigation for Slightly Nervous Beginners. Instead, there is memory. You learn star names first, but not as isolated trivia. Each star belongs to a house, a specific place where it rises or sets on the horizon. The horizon itself becomes segmented into directional markers. This is your compass, though compass almost feels too mechanical for something so alive. You memorize where Sirius rises, where Aldebaran sinks, where the Pleiades emerge in season. You repeat them until they become instinct. And if you forget, well, forgetting at sea has consequences significantly worse than failing algebra. The navigator's mind becomes an archive, layered and sacred. This is why master navigators often held profound social status. In some Polynesian and related Pacific traditions, navigational knowledge could be restricted, specialized, even spiritual. Not everyone learned everything. Certain chants, routes, and techniques were guarded carefully, passed through chosen lines or apprenticeships. Knowledge was power, yes, but more importantly, knowledge was survival. A strange little-known fact, in some traditions, navigators used mnemonic chants encoding directional sequences, star paths, and island relationships, oral maps sung into memory. Basically, your bedtime song could double as transoceanic GPS. Historians are still debating how much navigational secrecy existed across various island groups versus broader communal sharing, but selective transmission appears significant in many traditions, which makes sense. If your people's survival depends on precise knowledge, you don't exactly hand it out like party favors. The canoe beneath you shifts as night deepens. You begin practicing orientation not by looking at one star, but by understanding sequences. A navigator must anticipate change. Stars rise, arcs set, clouds interfere, seasons shift. So you are not memorizing static points. You are memorizing movement. This is celestial choreography. And your brain, wonderfully adaptable thing that it is, starts building what some scholars compare to mental maps or memory palaces. Routes become stories. Directions become relationships. The ocean itself becomes cognitively structured. Imagine carrying thousands of miles of navigation in your head while also helping paddle. No smartphone, no paper backup, just disciplined memory and terrifying competence. Your teacher likely includes practical tests too. Can you identify stars from partial emergence? Can you maintain bearing through cloud cover? Can you feel swell direction while sleep deprived? Because real voyages are not ideal conditions with inspirational music swelling in the background. Sometimes it's rain, exhaustion, and someone accidentally stepping on your hand. But this education extends beyond navigation. You learn weather patterns, canoe repair, fishing systems, food preservation, social obligations, and ritual etiquette. Voyaging is holistic. A navigator may guide direction, but leadership also demands understanding people, resources, and spiritual frameworks. There's humility here too. In many traditions, voyaging success was not framed purely as individual genius. Ancestors, gods, environmental respect, and communal cooperation mattered. Hubris at sea was a poor strategy. You can almost hear an elder saying, "Yes, you memorized the stars. Wonderful. Now also don't anger the ocean." This fusion of sacred and practical may feel foreign to some modern categories, but for Polynesian societies, separation between science and spirituality often wasn't the point. Observation, ritual, and identity intertwined. The common historical reality is that oral cultures developed astonishingly sophisticated information systems, despite long-standing colonial assumptions that writing equals superiority. Polynesian navigation stands among the clearest rebukes to that nonsense. You think about your own memory now. Passwords, birthdays, that one embarrassing thing you said in 2017. And here, by contrast, entire civilizations entrusted apprentices with ecological astronomy. No pressure at all. As the voyage continues, stars wheel overhead with elegant precision. You start recognizing patterns faster now, not because the sky changed, but because you did. Familiarity breeds confidence. You know where east whispers, where south leans, where seasonal shifts warn. And in that transformation lies something profound. Education here is not accumulation of disconnected facts, but reshaping perception itself. The world becomes legible. That may be the true genius of the sacred navigator's mind. Not merely storing information, but organizing reality into meaningful systems. A cloud is no longer weather. A bird is no longer scenery. A star is no longer decoration. Everything belongs. By dawn, after hours of recitation, observation, and subtle correction, the horizon glows gold once more. You are tired, certainly, slightly sore, absolutely, but also changed. Because knowledge this deep does not sit lightly. It roots, and somewhere generations before and after you, children under island skies repeat these same lessons, each one becoming a living vessel for routes no parchment could adequately hold. That is perhaps what feels most moving tonight. Before colonizers dismissed oral traditions, before maps redrew oceans in foreign ink, there were minds vast enough to carry the Pacific itself. Mind as chart, song as compass, memory as sail. And as your canoe presses onward through the breathing blue, guided by teachings older than empires, you understand the greatest map was never paper. It was people. Section 7 eventually, even memory begins to feel heavy. Not because it fails you, but because the ocean keeps going. Day after day, night after night, the canoe glides across distances so enormous they seem almost mathematically rude. The islands behind you are gone. The islands ahead, if they exist, remain invisible. You have entered what might politely be called the empty quarter of the Pacific, though empty is emotionally misleading when every direction contains enough water to inspire philosophical instability. This is where voyaging shifts. Earlier journeys may have followed archipelagos, stepping stone chains, or relatively reachable targets. But now, as Polynesian navigators expanded farther into eastern Polynesia, they faced oceanic gaps of astonishing scale, thousands of miles where no mountain peak interrupted the horizon, where weeks could pass without sight of land. Imagine committing to that with a woven sail and confidence. You wake one morning to the same blue expanse as yesterday, and the day before, and the week before that. Sunrise paints the sea gold, noon bleaches it white, dusk stains it crimson, and night restores its star-strewn majesty. But psychologically, repetition can be brutal. Humans love landmarks. We enjoy signs, exits, overpriced airport kiosks. Here, there is only horizon. The canoe itself becomes your world entire. Its wooden beams creak familiarly now. Salt crusts every surface. Water gourds are counted carefully. Food is rationed with increasing seriousness. Every preserved breadfruit mash ball suddenly feels like a sacred artifact. A strange little-known fact: fermented breadfruit paste, sometimes stored in pits before voyages, could last for long periods and serve as crucial sustenance. Glamorous? No. Effective? Absolutely. Fine dining has clearly evolved. Historians are still debating how frequently exploratory voyages intentionally ventured into the far eastern Pacific versus episodic migration pulses shaped by climate and social conditions. But one thing is undeniable: somebody kept going, and that required confronting fear. Not dramatic cinematic fear, perhaps, not screaming into storms every night, but quieter fear, the creeping weight of uncertainty. What if currents shifted? What if storms damaged sails? What if stars vanished for days? What if your remembered route held one tiny error stretched across 1,000 miles? The Pacific is not cruel exactly, but it is indifferent. That distinction matters. A storm eventually comes. Of course it does. Clouds gather with unsettling speed, wind sharpens, and suddenly your floating civilization is no longer gliding but enduring. Waves rise, not the rhythmic swells of navigational comfort, but muscular walls of moving force. Rain lashes skin. Sail tension becomes dangerous. Lashings groan. Everyone aboard shifts from exploration to immediate survival. You cling. This is where canoe design, training, and communal trust become brutally real. Double hulls stabilize. Lashings flex. Experienced leadership matters. Panic helps no one, though your internal monologue may absolutely be screaming. And still, they survive storms like this. Not always, but often enough. That may be one of history's most underappreciated truths. Pacific exploration was not possible because danger was absent. It was possible because systems evolved robust enough to manage danger repeatedly. After the storm passes, damage assessment is practical, immediate. Repairs, drying stores, reorienting, morale. You realize morale itself is technology. Songs matter here, chants, humor, shared ritual, because despair can erode judgment as surely as salt erodes fiber. So yes, perhaps someone jokes about your seasick expression. Even ancient voyagers likely understood that laughter remains useful when everyone smells terrible and death was recently nearby. The common historical event underlying all this is the settlement of eastern Polynesia, likely including remarkable voyages that eventually reached the Society Islands, Marquesas, and beyond. These journeys required not merely survival, but strategic exploration into vastness, and vastness changes people. Weeks at sea sharpen observation to near mystical levels. You notice subtle weather shifts faster, swells become companions, bird sightings trigger adrenaline. Dreams probably involve coconuts and stable ground. At night, beneath impossible constellations, you also confront scale. The stars above are overwhelming in open ocean darkness, uncorrupted by artificial light, blazing in densities modern skies rarely reveal. You can see the Milky Way as a luminous river. It's beautiful enough to quiet fear, at least briefly. And maybe that mattered too. Navigation was practical, but wonder likely traveled with it. Because out here, every successful course correction beneath ancient starlight must have felt like participating in something larger than migration alone. You are tiny, fragile, yet moving with intention through planetary immensity. That does something to the soul. Water supplies dwindle, then stabilize with rain catchment. Fishing supplements food. Discipline prevents catastrophe. This is not recklessness, it is systems layered against uncertainty. And slowly, impossibly, the empty quarter becomes not empty, but traversable. That word matters. Traversable means knowable, not easy, not safe, but possible. By the time another bird appears after long absence, the emotional impact is immense. It's not just a bird, it's possibility feathered. By the time cloud formations shift, every eye sharpens. By the time land finally rises, perhaps only a faint volcanic outline at dawn, it is not merely discovery, it is vindication. The route worked, the memory held, the canoe endured. And as shore slowly takes shape from abstraction into reality, you understand that the greatest challenge was never just distance. It was sustaining belief across distance, belief in stars, belief in training, belief in each other. So when Polynesian navigators crossed these so-called empty spaces, they were not conquering void. They were proving that emptiness itself could be read, endured, and transformed into pathway. And somewhere between storm scars and sunrise landfall, you begin to understand courage is sometimes just continuing until the horizon answers. Section 8 land does answer eventually. At first it appears almost offensively subtle, a smudge where sea should be, a rumor on the horizon so faint you wonder whether exhaustion has finally upgraded into hallucination. But as dawn strengthens, the shape rises. Not an atoll this time, not a low whisper of coral and palms. Something larger, something impossible. Mountains. They thrust upward from the Pacific like the backs of sleeping giants, volcanic slopes wrapped in cloud, green ridges catching sunrise in folds of gold and shadow. After weeks of horizontal sameness, vertical land feels almost absurd. You have reached Hawaii, or at least the ancestral islands that will one day carry that name. Few places on Earth better embody the audacity of Polynesian voyaging. These islands sit among the most isolated inhabited archipelagos in the world, roughly 2,400 miles from the nearest continent. To find them intentionally across open ocean was not luck. It was genius, persistence, and a truly unreasonable commitment to reading stars correctly. You stand on the canoe's platform, salt-stiff and wide-eyed, as volcanic peaks sharpen against morning light. Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, and their kin do not simply emerge. They announce themselves. After so much sea, Hawaii feels mythic, and in many ways it was. The settlement of Hawaii, likely by Polynesian voyagers from the Marquesas and later Tahiti in different waves, represents one of humanity's greatest navigational achievements. Imagine targeting a tiny cluster of islands in the middle of the planet's largest ocean and actually succeeding. Meanwhile, some of us still miss freeway exits. A strange little known fact, sweet potatoes, native to South America, were present in Polynesia before European contact, suggesting possible pre-European interactions between Polynesians and South Americans, or at least remarkable plant movement. Historians are still debating exactly how that happened, but yes, your bedtime story just casually includes one of history's juiciest transoceanic mysteries. As your canoe approaches shore, signs of life multiply. Birds thicken overhead, the scent changes, wet earth, vegetation blossoms, surf pounds reef and volcanic coast. Freshwater streams glint in valleys. For voyagers, this is ecological treasure. Hawaii offers fertile volcanic soils, abundant marine resources, varied elevations, and climates ranging from lush rainforests to alpine chill. It's practically a civilization starter pack, though admittedly with more lava. Landing, however, is not simple. Surf zones can destroy canoes if approached poorly. Coastal knowledge matters. Timing matters. Reef passages matter. After crossing thousands of miles, it would be deeply frustrating to be defeated by parking. But Polynesian expertise extends to landfall too. Eventually feet touch shore, solid ground. Your legs, after weeks of sea adaptation, likely wobble like overcooked noodles. Yet beneath awkward relief lies something profound. Arrival is not ending. It is beginning. Settlement requires adaptation. New islands mean new winds, fisheries, soils, gods interpreted through fresh landscapes. Hawaiian ecosystems differ from central Polynesian homelands, and settlers must adjust agriculture, social systems, and environmental practices accordingly. Taro cultivation expands. Fish pond engineering eventually develops with astonishing sophistication. Heiau, sacred structures will rise. Genealogies will root chiefs to divine ancestry. The stars remain, but now they guide seasonal cycles as much as voyages. Historians generally place initial settlement somewhere around the first millennium CE, though dates and phases remain debated. What matters most tonight is not exact chronology, but scale of accomplishment. You are witnessing the peopling of one of Earth's remotest island chains by navigators without industrial technology. That sentence alone deserves more awe than it usually gets. And yet Polynesian settlement was not a simplistic paradise narrative. Resource management mattered. Social hierarchies developed. Environmental impacts occurred. Hawaii became dynamic, complex, and deeply sophisticated over centuries. Still, in these first generations, there is likely a profound emotional duality, success and separation. Because reaching Hawaii also means distance from ancestral homelands so vast that return may be rare or impossible. You are not just discovering new land, you are becoming new people in new land. That transformation echoes in language, ritual, and identity. You look inland. Towering forests cloak slopes where unfamiliar birds call. Lava fields whisper geological power beneath apparent stillness. Waterfalls thread cliffs like silver cords. The islands feel alive in ways both welcoming and humbling. Polynesian cosmology often embraced kinship between people, land, and gods, and here such frameworks would deepen. Volcanic fire, ocean abundance, mountain weather. Hawaii is not merely occupied, it is interpreted spiritually. And practical jokes surely survive too. Somewhere, surely, an exhausted voyager stepped on sharp lava rock and invented ancient equivalent profanity. As days become months, voyaging canoes still matter. Inter-island travel, knowledge exchange, and subsequent migrations continue shaping Hawaiian society. Navigation remains heritage, not obsolete relic. The stars that brought you here now watch over adaptation. Fishing grounds are learned, rain cycles mapped, sacred places named, children born. And perhaps that is the gentlest miracle of all. What began as terrifying uncertainty becomes home. Not instantly, not effortlessly, but gradually through memory married to landscape. By night, Hawaiian skies blaze just as brilliantly as the open oceans, though now framed by volcanic silhouettes. You look upward and realize those same stars that once guided survival across emptiness now connect this new homeland to ancestral oceans behind you. You are not lost. You are linked. And as trade winds rustle through palms while surf whispers against black volcanic stone, you begin to understand that Polynesian voyaging was never solely about reaching places. It was about extending belonging across water, across generations, across impossible distance. So here, on islands born from fire and found by starlight, you rest at last. Not because the journey of Polynesia is over, but because one of its boldest dreams has become earth beneath your feet. Section 9. Once your sea legs finally stop insisting the earth itself is swaying, which frankly takes longer than anyone would like, you begin discovering that arrival is only the first chapter of belonging. Finding an island is extraordinary. Staying alive there for generations, building meaning into its valleys and coastlines, and weaving memory into stone, soil, and ceremony, that is civilization. So now, beneath skies once used to navigate oceans, you watch Polynesian settlers transform landfall into homeland. The canoe rests ashore, but its spirit does not retire. It lingers in architecture, agriculture, ritual, and worldview. Because when you have crossed half the planet by reading stars and swells, you do not simply forget who you are because you found a nice beach. You build. Across Polynesia, from Hawaii to Tahiti, Samoa to the Marquesas, Tonga to countless smaller islands, communities shape environments with astonishing adaptability. The details vary by island ecology, of course, because not every paradise conveniently offers identical resources. Some islands are volcanic and fertile. Others are coral atolls, where farming requires creativity bordering on wizardry. But everywhere, settlers begin the sacred act of making place. You help clear land carefully, often balancing immediate survival with inherited ecological wisdom. Taro patches spread where water allows. Breadfruit, yam, bananas, coconuts, and other transported crops root themselves into new soils. This portable agricultural package, carried across oceans, becomes one of humanity's great acts of botanical determination. Imagine hauling your grocery store and future orchard across thousands of miles in a canoe. A strange little-known fact: Polynesian settlers sometimes transported not just plants and animals, but deliberately introduced useful species like paper mulberry for bark cloth and gourds for containers. Your ancestors were essentially moving with an entire DIY civilization kit. Historians are still debating the full environmental consequences of early settlement on different islands, especially regarding deforestation and species extinction. But one truth remains clear. These societies were active ecological engineers, not passive castaways. Sacred spaces emerged too. Marae, heiau, and related ceremonial complexes, depending on region, become centers of spiritual and political life. Stones are arranged not randomly but intentionally, often linking ancestors, gods, chiefs, and cosmic order. These spaces are not merely religious sites. They are maps of meaning. You stand within one at dusk. Torches flicker, chants rise. The stars overhead remain constant, but now they frame community rather than voyage. Navigation knowledge still matters, yes, yet identity is expanding. You are no longer only traveler, you are settler, parent, caretaker, story holder. Genealogy becomes especially powerful here. Polynesian societies often preserved elaborate ancestral lineages connecting living people to divine or heroic origins. Memory remains central, not just where you sailed, but who you descend from. This continuity matters deeply when your ancestors literally crossed oceans to make your existence possible. Family history hits differently when grandpa may be navigated by Venus. Social structures also grow increasingly sophisticated. Chiefs, priests, navigators, artisans, roles diversify. Resource distribution, ritual authority, and political complexity deepen. In places like Hawaii and Tonga, highly stratified systems eventually emerge. Elsewhere, structures differ, but complexity is common. This is no simplistic island utopia. It is governance, agriculture, engineering, conflict, trade, art, and yes, probably occasional arguments over fishing rights. One common historical reality often overlooked is Polynesian mastery of aquaculture. Hawaiian fish ponds, for instance, represent remarkable environmental engineering, carefully constructed systems that manage fish populations sustainably. Ancient seafood logistics, but elegant. You walk shorelines where children learn currents as naturally as language. Elders pass down chants. Canoe building continues. Tattoo traditions encode identity, rank, and belonging through skin itself. Bark cloth, featherwork, carving, dance. Culture flourishes not despite migration, but because of it. The stars still whisper, but now so do mountains, reefs, and sacred groves. Mythology adapts too. Across Polynesia, stories of Maui, Tangaroa, Pele, and countless regional deities shape interpretation of landscapes. Volcanoes are not just geology. Oceans are not just water. The world remains relational, animated by forces beyond the purely material. This worldview can seem poetic to modern minds, but it also reinforces practical respect. Sacred groves may protect resources. Ritual fishing practices may encode sustainability. Spiritual systems often intersect with ecological realities more than outsiders initially realize. Of course, not everything is serene moonlight and responsible taro cultivation. Inter-island warfare, political rivalry, and environmental pressures also emerge. Human societies remain human, even when surrounded by turquoise perfection. But perhaps that complexity is what makes Polynesian civilization so compelling. These were not wandering dreamers who stumbled onto islands and lounged eternally beneath palm trees. They were adaptive strategists, builders, navigators of both ocean and society. By night, as waves hush against reef edges, you look upward again. The same stars that once represented routes now also represent continuity. They connect homeland to homeland, island to island, ancestor to descendant. And maybe that's why navigation never truly ends. Even when canoes rest, orientation remains essential. Who are you here? How do you live well? How do you remember where you came from while honoring where you stand? These questions become just as important as finding land. The canoe, weathered now, may one day rot, but the systems it carried, memory, agriculture, sacred order, social knowledge, take root. This is how voyaging becomes civilization, not by abandoning movement, but by embedding its lessons into place. So as trade winds rustle leaves planted by hands that crossed impossible distances, and chants rise through temple stones aligned beneath ancient skies, you realize something beautifully quiet. The greatest journeys are not always measured by how far you travel, but by what you build when you arrive. And still, for some people, arrival was never enough. You might think that after settling lush archipelagos, cultivating breadfruit, constructing sacred temples, and finally enjoying the radical luxury of not being constantly damp, Polynesian voyagers would collectively decide, this seems sufficient, let's stay put. But apparently someone looked east again, far east, toward one of the most isolated, inhabited places on Earth, Rapa Nui, known to many as Easter Island. If Hawaii was audacious, Rapa Nui feels almost mischievous, like humanity daring itself to press the limits of possibility just to see what happens. Located more than 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited island, this tiny volcanic triangle in the southeastern Pacific represents one of Polynesia's boldest navigational achievements. Picture yourself aboard a canoe, scanning endless emptiness, aiming for a speck so remote it almost seems statistically impolite. And yet somehow, Polynesian navigators found it. Historians generally agree that settlers likely arrived from eastern Polynesia around the first millennium CE, though exact dates remain debated. What matters tonight is not merely when, but how astonishingly improbable the feat was. Rapa Nui rises from the sea not as towering paradise, but as windswept volcanic isolation. 3 extinct volcanoes shape its triangular form. Grasslands roll beneath vast sky. Fresh water is limited. Trees once stood more prominently, though ecological changes would later transform the island dramatically. Still, land is land, and for voyagers crossing that much ocean, even a remote volcanic outpost could become destiny. A strange little-known fact, despite Rapa Nui's famous giant moai statues, many moai bodies extend deep below ground, with full torsos buried over centuries by sediment, which means archaeology occasionally resembles uncovering very large, very stoic, surprise giants. You arrive, perhaps exhausted beyond language, and begin again. Shelter, food systems, adaptation. This pattern repeats across Polynesia, but here isolation intensifies everything. Resource management becomes even more critical. Social cohesion matters, innovation matters, and culture, as always, blooms. The moai, those iconic stone ancestors, eventually emerge as one of humanity's most remarkable monumental traditions. Carved primarily from volcanic tuff at Rano Quarry, these figures likely represented revered ancestors or powerful lineages, embodying spiritual and political authority. Transporting them remains one of history's great engineering debates. Did they roll, slide, walk upright with ropes? Historians are still debating whether many moai were moved primarily by rocking them forward with coordinated rope teams, though experimental archaeology suggests this may indeed have been possible. Imagine your family legacy involving giant walking statues. Casual. But while outsiders often fixate on the moai as mysterious relics, they make far more sense when viewed within broader Polynesian frameworks of ancestor veneration, sacred landscapes, and social competition. Rapa Nui was not an alien anomaly. It was Polynesian. Its language, people, and navigational routes connect deeply to wider Eastern Polynesian traditions, even as isolation shaped unique developments. That said, extreme remoteness carries consequences. Ecological pressures on Rapa Nui became profound over time, particularly regarding deforestation. The once palm-rich island changed significantly, and scholars have long debated causes: human overuse, rats introduced by settlers, climate variation, or combinations thereof. Earlier simplistic ecocide narratives have grown more nuanced, thankfully, because human environment stories are rarely that cartoonishly tidy. Still, life here demanded adaptation under tight constraints. You stand on cliffs where waves crash endlessly against basalt, and the sense of distance becomes existential. There are few places on Earth where humanity feels simultaneously so capable and so alone. Yet Polynesian settlers did not merely survive here. They created identity, ceremony, art, political systems. Agriculture adapted through rock mulching and ingenious land use. Even in isolation, memory of broader Polynesian heritage endured, transformed but not erased. There's something deeply moving about that, because migration is not just movement outward, it is carrying inward. Language, myth, navigation, ancestor reverence, all packed into canoes and minds. The common historical reality of Rapa Nui is often overshadowed by sensationalism, collapsed myths, outsider mystery, giant heads, and tourist brochures. But beneath all that is a profoundly human story. People crossed staggering distances, found one of the world's remotest islands, and built meaning there. By sunset, standing near Ahu platforms where moai gaze inland over descendants rather than out to sea, you sense a symbolic shift. The statues are guardians of community. Voyaging brought people here. But now continuity matters more than departure, at least for a time. And perhaps that is what makes Rapa Nui feel so haunting tonight. Not mystery for mystery's sake, but the emotional weight of ultimate remoteness transformed into home. You think of the navigators who first sighted this land. What did they feel? Triumph? Relief? Fear? Did they know how far from everything they had come? Or was everything simply wherever your people carried memory? The stars above Rapa Nui are the same stars over Samoa, Tahiti, Hawaii. Different angles, different meanings, same celestial companions. So even here, at the edge of Polynesian expansion, you are not severed. You are connected by sky. And as wind sweeps volcanic grass beneath watchful stone ancestors, you begin to understand that the Polynesian story was never just about reaching paradise. Sometimes, it was about finding belonging at the farthest imaginable edge of the world, Section 11's. And then, because apparently warm tropical brilliance was still not quite enough of a challenge, Polynesian navigators turned south. Very far south, past familiar breadfruit zones and coral lagoons, beyond many of the ecological comforts that had sustained generations, into colder waters where stars remained trustworthy, but the sea itself grew moodier, sharper, and considerably less interested in your comfort. Ahead lay Aotearoa, New Zealand, the land of the long white cloud. If Hawaii tested navigational precision and Rapa Nui tested isolation, Aotearoa tested adaptation on an entirely different scale. This was not merely another island chain with palms and reef fish politely waiting. These were vast temperate islands with mountain ranges, dense forests, colder seasons, and ecological systems unlike anything most Polynesian voyagers had yet encountered. And still, they came, likely arriving in waves from East Polynesia sometime around the late 1st or early 2nd millennium CE. The ancestors of the Maori undertook one of the final great chapters of Polynesian expansion. You imagine the canoes cutting through rougher southern swells, winds carrying a colder bite, seabirds changing, ocean behavior subtly different. No one aboard could reasonably claim they were just seeing where this goes. This was ambition with paddles. A strange little-known fact. Upon arrival, Maori ancestors encountered giant flightless birds called moa, some species towering several feet tall. Imagine landing after crossing an ocean and discovering what is essentially a feathered prehistoric buffet. Historians are still debating aspects of settlement timing, migration waves, and social dynamics, but what remains certain is this: Polynesian voyagers adapted with extraordinary sophistication to environments dramatically different from tropical homelands. You sight land first, not through volcanic peaks alone, but perhaps through those famous long white clouds stretched above mountainous terrain. Cloud reading remains relevant, but now the scale of landmass itself can feel astonishing. New Zealand is enormous compared to many Pacific islands. Rivers, alpine zones, dense bush, giant ferns, and unfamiliar weather systems all demand recalibration. This is not just settlement, this is reinvention. The agricultural toolkit carried south, taro, breadfruit, coconuts, faces challenges in cooler climates. Some crops struggle. Kumara, the sweet potato, becomes crucial, but cultivation methods require innovation. Storage pits, seasonal planning, and regional adaptation matter enormously. You can almost hear collective ancestral sighing when someone realizes tropical assumptions are no longer reliable. Wait, where are the coconuts? Still, Polynesian genius lies not in static tradition, but flexible systems. Maori society develops from Polynesian roots while evolving distinctly in response to Aotearoa's environment. Navigation traditions remain foundational, yet life increasingly orients around river valleys, fortified past settlements, hunting, fishing, and intertribal structures shaped by new landscapes. Forests become canoes, mountains become ancestors, new birds, new fish, new weather, all folded into inherited frameworks of kinship and cosmology. This continuity through change is extraordinary. Maori oral traditions preserve ancestral canoe lineages, waka histories connecting tribes to voyaging origins. These are not quaint myths detached from reality. They are identity architecture, preserving migration memory across centuries. You stand beside a great waka, carved and elegant, and realize the canoe remains sacred, not simply because it transported people, but because it transported belonging. The common historical event here is one of humanity's great environmental transitions. Tropical seafarers successfully colonizing and thriving in temperate islands through adaptive innovation. It deserves more cinematic appreciation than it usually gets. And there is humor too, surely. Imagine generations skilled in reading coral reefs now learning entirely new coastal systems while also dealing with weather significantly less beach-friendly. Paradise, but with hypothermia potential. Yet from these challenges emerges profound cultural richness, carving traditions, haka, wakapapa, celestial knowledge, weaving, navigation memory, and deeply place-rooted spiritual relationships. Aotearoa becomes not an endpoint, but another center, and perhaps that's one of the most beautiful recurring truths in Polynesian history. Migration does not merely spread people thinner, it creates new centers of depth. By night, southern skies reveal different celestial emphases. As latitude changes, familiar stars shift positions, new patterns rise. The navigator's knowledge must evolve again. This adaptability is crucial. Polynesian wayfinding was never simplistic rote memorization. It was dynamic environmental intelligence. You lie beneath stars in a colder land, wrapped tighter now, listening to winds moving through giant trees and feel the emotional gravity of continuity. Across millennia, from Lapita ancestors to Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and now Aotearoa, one pattern endures. Observe, adapt, remember, belong. Maori descendants would eventually build societies of formidable resilience and complexity, preserving ancestral memory even through future colonial disruption. But tonight, in these early generations, the focus is simpler. Survive winter, learn birdsong, map rivers, honor arrival, and always remember the ocean behind you. Because even in this new southern homeland, identity remains voyaged as much as rooted. The stars that once guided you across tropical seas still whisper overhead, though now they gleam above snow-capped peaks and mist-heavy valleys. Different world, same sky. So as dawn lifts over fern forests and distant mountains, and your breath fogs faintly in air far cooler than your ancestors once knew, you understand something quietly magnificent. Polynesian expansion was not just about mastering one environment. It was about carrying mastery itself into every new horizon. Section 12. For centuries, the ocean had been your library, your road, your inheritance. Then sails appeared on the horizon that did not belong to your genealogies. At first, perhaps, they looked strange but not necessarily ominous. Towering ships with rigid masts, unfamiliar hull designs, cloth formations unlike the elegant efficiency of Polynesian sails. European vessels entered the Pacific comparatively late, but when they did, they often arrived wrapped in assumptions as heavy as their timber. And so now, after generations of Polynesian brilliance crossing oceans by stars, swells, birds, and memory, you witness one of history's more frustrating patterns. Outsiders showing up and occasionally assuming they invented discovery. To be fair, not every European explorer dismissed indigenous expertise equally, but misunderstanding was common enough to deserve a collective ancestral eye roll. When navigators like Captain James Cook sailed the Pacific in the 18th century, They encountered societies whose maritime knowledge was profound. Cook himself, notably, benefited from Polynesian navigation expertise, most famously through Tupaya, a Tahitian navigator and priest whose geographical knowledge astonished Europeans. Tupaya could describe vast networks of islands across enormous distances, often with an accuracy outsiders struggled to comprehend. Imagine being on a giant imperial expedition and realizing the local guy already knows the ocean better than your maps. A strange little-known fact, Tupaya reportedly could chart or describe dozens upon dozens of islands over a huge expanse of ocean, drawing from Polynesian navigational traditions that Europeans initially underestimated. In modern terms, he was basically a walking, talking Pacific supercomputer. Historians are still debating the full extent to which European explorers truly grasped Polynesian navigational systems versus filtering them through colonial biases. But one thing remains clear. Many Western observers misunderstood what they were seeing. Some assumed accidental drift, others romanticized. Some dismissed oral systems because they lacked written charts. This was, scientifically speaking, a terrible take. The common historical reality is that European arrival brought not only documentation and new exchanges, but disease, missionary pressure, political upheaval, trade disruption, and colonization. Polynesian societies were not static paradises waiting politely for contact. They were dynamic civilizations suddenly confronting invasive systems of power, and contact changed everything. New goods arrived, metal tools, firearms, cloth, livestock. So did devastating diseases like smallpox and influenza in various Pacific regions, often with catastrophic consequences due to limited immunity. You stand on a shoreline watching ships unload objects of wonder and danger simultaneously. Iron adzes could revolutionize carving, guns could reshape warfare, missionaries could challenge cosmologies, traders could alter economics. Contact is rarely simple. It is temptation, disruption, adaptation, and grief braided together. Navigation itself shifts too. European instruments, compasses, sextants, charts offer powerful tools, but their arrival also contributes over time to the devaluing of ancestral systems, especially under colonial ideologies that equate Western methods with superiority. And here lies one of history's quieter tragedies. A civilization that crossed the largest ocean on Earth using embodied ecological genius is sometimes told its knowledge is primitive. You can feel the absurdity. Still, Polynesian societies do not merely vanish before change. They negotiate, resist, adapt, hybridize, and preserve in countless ways. Some chiefs strategically engage with foreigners. Some communities integrate useful technologies. Others resist cultural erosion fiercely. There are jokes to be made too, because history remains deeply human. Somewhere, undoubtedly, an elder navigator watched Europeans fumble local conditions and thought, these people crossed oceans just to get stuck on our reef. But beneath humor lies immense upheaval. Sacred systems face pressure. Languages confront suppression. Traditional voyaging declines in many places as colonial structures reshape priorities. Yet memory persists. In chants, in family lines, in ceremonial canoe practices, in quiet observations passed down despite missionary schools or imperial borders. European documentation, for all its distortions, also inadvertently preserved some Polynesian knowledge. Ironically, colonizers sometimes recorded traditions even while contributing to their marginalization. History loves contradiction. By night, you stand beneath stars still unchanged by empire. That matters. No matter what flags rise on shore, the heavens remain, and perhaps that continuity becomes a kind of resistance. Because while colonial maps redraw territories, ancestral navigation understood something deeper. The Pacific was never empty space between imperial holdings. It was homeland, network, kinship. European arrival often fragmented that perception politically, but it could not erase its truth entirely. The shock of encounter ripples for generations. Trade routes expand, Missionary Christianity spreads. Traditional authority structures transform. Some islands become strategic ports, others become colonized territories. Violence, alliance, resilience all unfold unevenly. No single Polynesian experience defines this era, but nearly all are touched. And so you drift through this moment with bittersweet awareness. Brilliance recognized too late by some, exploited by others, defended by many. Still, Tupaya's memory lingers. The navigators linger. The star compass lingers. Because knowledge rooted over millennia does not disappear simply because outsiders arrive with paper maps and confidence. It may dim, it may be challenged, but beneath imposed systems, older constellations remain. So as foreign sails multiply and island worlds shift under pressures both alluring and devastating, you hold one quiet certainty close. Polynesian navigation did not become remarkable because Europeans noticed it. It was remarkable long before they appeared on the horizon. Section 13. And then as generations pass, something subtler than conquest begins to unfold. Not always dramatic, not always marked by cannon smoke or treaties signed under suspiciously one-sided conditions. Sometimes it arrives in classrooms, churches, new laws, new languages, new priorities. The stars are still overhead, of course, but fewer children are taught to read them the old way. Canoes still exist, but in many places they become less central to survival as colonial economies, imported technologies, and imposed institutions reshape island life. Traditional navigation does not vanish all at once. It fades unevenly, quietly, like a song remembered only in fragments. This is the long shadow of colonialism, not merely occupation, but reorientation. Across Polynesia, European and later American, French, British, and other imperial powers redraw governance, alter land systems, and often suppress indigenous practices in favor of foreign religion, schooling, and commerce. Missionaries may discourage spiritual traditions. Colonial administrators prioritize imported structures. Plantation economies and resource extraction shift social life. And while adaptation remains a Polynesian strength, loss accumulates too. You watch as some sacred knowledge becomes private, some becomes stigmatized, some nearly disappears. Imagine inheriting one of humanity's greatest navigational traditions, only to be told that true progress now means forgetting it. That wound can last centuries. A strange little-known fact. In some Pacific communities, traditional star compass knowledge survived not in mainstream institutions, but through isolated elders, ceremonial practices, or partial memory, preserved almost like embers hidden from wind. Historians are still debating how much navigational knowledge was continuously preserved versus later reconstructed through cultural revitalization, because colonial disruption fractured transmission in complex ways. But what is undeniable is this: interruption occurred, and interruption matters. Without active practice, embodied systems erode. If your grandfather no longer sails by stars because colonial trade routes or missionary influence changed life, then your father may know less, and you may know only stories. The ocean remains, the stars remain, but pathways dim. This period can feel especially heartbreaking because the brilliance never became false. It simply became undervalued under colonial frameworks that often equated Western technology with civilization itself. Iron ships, compasses, steam, paper charts. These tools were undeniably powerful, but colonial arrogance often treated them not as additions, but replacements, as though memory itself were obsolete. And yet, Polynesian identity refuses easy erasure. Language survives in homes, chants, and resistance movements. Tattoo traditions persist or reemerge. Genealogies hold. Canoe carving continues in places, even if transformed. Dance, navigation fragments, oral history all become repositories of continuity. You begin to understand cultural survival less as uninterrupted purity and more as stubborn persistence. Sometimes resistance is loud. Sometimes it is simply refusing to forget. Across the 19th and 20th centuries, colonized Polynesian societies faced land dispossession, political annexation, military occupation, nuclear testing in parts of the Pacific, demographic collapse from disease, and economic restructuring. It is not one story, but many overlapping disruptions. And still, people endure. There is irony, too, because even while Western systems dominate, romantic fascination with ancient navigation sometimes grows among outsiders who fail to protect the living cultures behind it. Humanity does adore admiring things after helping endanger them, but not all is lost. Cultural leaders, scholars, artists, and elders begin preserving what they can. Songs are recorded, languages taught, voyaging traditions discussed anew, and in some communities, whispers begin. What if the old ways were never truly gone? You stand beneath the night sky in this era, perhaps on an island now marked by churches, ports, roads, or military installations, and look upward. The stars have not changed. Orion still rises. The Pleiades still return. Swells still move. Birds still fly. The map remains, even if fewer can read it. That realization is powerful, because colonialism can suppress practice, but it cannot rewrite the heavens. This becomes fertile ground for revival. Though you do not yet know it fully, seeds are forming, questions, research, pride, longing. Younger generations begin asking elders. Scholars compare oral traditions. Communities seek reconnection. Memory, though wounded, is not dead. And perhaps this is where the Polynesian story reveals one of its deepest truths. Navigation was never merely technical. It was philosophical. To know where you are, to know where you came from, to know that imposed systems, however overwhelming, are not the only stars available. By the late 20th century, these questions will ignite renaissance. But for now, you rest in the in-between, an age of partial forgetting, survival under pressure, and quiet continuity. A canoe may sit unused, a chant may be incomplete, a route may blur, yet somewhere an elder still remembers enough to point, and sometimes enough is all a future needs. So as waves continue brushing shores colonizers renamed but never fully redefined, you hold close a soft, resilient thought. Even when pathways fade, the sky waits patiently for remembering. Section 14. And then after centuries of disruption, doubt, and that particularly exhausting colonial habit of assuming ancient brilliance needed modern validation, something extraordinary happens. People remember, not perfectly, not all at once, but deliberately. Like embers coaxed back into flame. By the 20th century, across parts of Polynesia and the wider Pacific, cultural revitalization movements begin gathering strength. Language renewal, dance revival, sovereignty activism, traditional arts. These currents build quietly, then visibly. And among the most powerful awakenings is the rebirth of voyaging. Because somewhere beneath missionary schooling, imported borders, and engine-powered convenience, a question has endured. Could the ancestors really do what oral traditions say they did? And perhaps more importantly, can you still do it now? Enter Hokulea. Even her name glows with celestial significance, referring to Arcturus, the star of gladness, crucial in Hawaiian navigation. Launched in 1975, this double-hulled voyaging canoe was not a museum prop or nostalgic art piece. It was a challenge, a statement, a vessel built to test, honor, and revive Polynesian wayfinding on the open ocean. Imagine the emotional gravity. After generations of colonial skepticism, indigenous navigators would once again cross vast Pacific distances using traditional methods, no modern navigation instruments. Just stars, swells, birds, memory. Basically, your ancestors logging back in after centuries offline. A strange little known fact, because much traditional Hawaiian wayfinding knowledge had been severely disrupted, early revival leaders sought expertise from Maupiailug, a master navigator from Sadawal in Micronesia, where non-instrument navigation traditions had survived more continuously. This cross-Pacific knowledge exchange became one of history's most beautiful acts of indigenous collaboration. Mao did not simply teach technique, he helped restore confidence. Historians are still debating precise continuities and reconstructions within specific Polynesian navigational traditions, but Hokulea's voyages proved beyond reasonable doubt that non-instrument oceanic navigation remained profoundly viable. In 1976, Hokulea sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti, successfully, without modern navigational tools. Pause there for a moment. This was not symbolic theater. This was empirical vindication, a practical demonstration that ancestral navigation systems, long dismissed by some as exaggerated or impossible, worked magnificently. You stand aboard Hokulea beneath modern skies, perhaps with airplanes faintly crossing above and satellites orbiting invisibly, and yet your orientation comes from the same cosmos your ancestors trusted centuries ago. Stars rise, swells cross, clouds hint, birds confirm, the ocean remembers too. The voyage electrifies cultural consciousness. For native Hawaiians and broader Polynesian communities, this is not just maritime achievement, it is identity restored. School children learn, communities gather, language deepens, canoe carving revives, pride expands. Suddenly, history is not a colonial footnote. It is living inheritance. And Hokulea does not stop. Subsequent voyages span Polynesia and eventually the globe, connecting indigenous communities, environmental stewardship, education, and ancestral knowledge into one magnificent moving classroom. You can almost hear the ancestors trying not to say, "Told you so." What makes this revival especially powerful is that it does not require rejecting modernity wholesale. GPS exists, engines exist, weather satellites exist, but revival asserts that ancestral knowledge was never invalid simply because newer tools appeared. Traditional navigation becomes not obsolete relic, but sophisticated intellectual heritage, a worldview, a discipline, a cultural compass. The common historical event here is one of the greatest cultural renaissances of the modern era. Indigenous peoples reclaiming knowledge systems once marginalized, then proving their relevance publicly and beautifully. And beyond navigation itself, Hokulea symbolizes broader resurgence, language revitalization, ecological consciousness, sovereignty movements, and intergenerational healing. Because reclaiming routes can also mean reclaiming self-definition. You watch apprentices train again, star compass exercises, ocean swell interpretation, canoe protocol, ceremony. The old pathways become legible not because history reversed, but because communities chose remembrance over erasure. There's tenderness in that choice, and discipline. Revival is not costume, it is work, long nights, humility, learning from elders, correcting misconceptions, building canoes, making mistakes, trying again. By moonlight on open water, Hokulea's hull cuts across seas once crossed by countless unnamed navigators whose brilliance deserved recognition all along. Their descendants are not imitating ghosts. They are continuing lineage. This distinction matters deeply. As islands reconnect through voyaging networks, something fragmented begins mending. Hawaii to Tahiti, Aotearoa to Samoa. Cultural exchange strengthens. The Pacific, so often divided by colonial borders, reasserts itself as relational ocean once more. Sea of islands, not scattered isolation, connected world. And beneath it all, stars remain what they have always been, patient, available, waiting. So when Hokulea sails under Arcturus, beneath constellations older than empire, you feel the extraordinary softness of cultural truth resurfacing. The map was never lost entirely. It was carried, quietly, until enough hands were ready to raise the sail again. Section 15. Now, after all these crossings through Lapita horizons, sacred star schools, storm-dark swells, volcanic landfalls, colonial shadows, and revival canoes lifting ancient memory back into moonlit water, you find yourself once more beneath the night sky, not in some distant, untouched past, not entirely in the modern world either, but somewhere softer, a place where memory and starlight overlap. You lie back, perhaps on the deck of a canoe, perhaps on warm shore sand, Perhaps simply in your own bed listening to this while your blankets become significantly more appealing than transoceanic migration, and above you the stars remain. That may be the quietest revelation of all. Empires rose, empires redrew maps, ships changed shape, languages collided, religions spread, airplanes pierced cloud layers, satellites blinked awake, and still, the same stars that guided Polynesian navigators across the largest ocean on Earth continue their patient arcs overhead. Arcturus still rises, the Pleiades still return, ocean swells still travel thousands of miles, birds still trace invisible pathways. The map is alive. And perhaps that is why Polynesian wayfinding endures so powerfully today, not merely because it was ingenious, though it absolutely was, and not only because it proved outsiders wrong, though that remains satisfying, but because it offers something many modern people ache for: relationship. A way of being in the world rooted not in domination, but attentive belonging. To navigate traditionally, you do not demand the sea obey you. You listen, you notice, you remember, you participate. In a century often obsessed with faster answers, louder technologies, and digital certainty, there is something profoundly calming about a system built on patient observation and trust earned over generations. The stars do not shout, they guide quietly. A strange little known fact: modern voyaging communities often describe navigation not simply as travel, but as a way to reconnect with ancestral identity, environmental stewardship, and collective responsibility, which is honestly far more elegant than yelling at your phone when signal drops. Historians are still debating certain migration timelines, contact theories, and regional navigational variations, and likely always will, because scholars, much like seabirds, are wonderfully persistent creatures. But the larger truth shines clearly. Polynesian navigators achieved one of humanity's greatest intellectual and exploratory accomplishments. They transformed the Pacific from barrier into bridge. They proved memory could rival machinery. They carried ecosystems, languages, cosmologies, and courage across distances that still humble the imagination. And maybe tonight, as you drift with this story, you feel something beyond admiration. Maybe you feel invitation. Not necessarily to build a canoe tomorrow, which, depending on your schedule, may be inconvenient, but to notice more, to look up, to ask what wisdom your own world quietly offers when screens dim. Because wayfinding at its heart is not just about oceans, it is about orientation. Who are you? Where have you come from? What guides you when clouds cover familiar stars? These questions are ancient and deeply human. The Pacific night stretches above, vast and velvet dark, yet no longer empty. You know now that emptiness was never the right word. It was always full of roots, of ancestors, of songs, of remembered horizons. You picture Hokulea gliding still. You picture Lapita potters shaping clay. You picture children in Aotearoa hearing waka genealogies. You picture Rapa Nui stone faces beneath dawn. You picture Hawaiian peaks rising from impossible blue, and threaded through all of it, one luminous continuity, people looking upward and understanding. The wind softens now, waves hush. Your journey, at least for tonight, begins to slow. There is no need to paddle harder, no need to scan every cloud. You have crossed enough. So rest here a while beneath this ancient celestial roof shared by navigators and dreamers alike. Feel how the sea, even imagined, rocks gently. Feel how history, when whispered softly enough, becomes less burden and more lullaby. The stars above your small corner of earth are old friends, whether you know their names or not. They have watched countless voyagers before you. They will watch countless after. And somewhere in that steady shining is a comfort older than maps. You are part of a world still filled with guidance. So your breathing slows, the canoe drifts, the horizon softens, and as night folds around you like a woven sail, you do not need to fear the vastness because the stars are still there, quiet, patient, whispering, guiding, home. Open quote, open quote, open quote, end of script. Sweet dreams. Close quote, close quote, close quote.